Perfect. So we're going to get started. It's quite strange to talk about Hemingway in an e-commerce conference. So just want to know, like, how many of you know Hemingway? Maybe hands up. Have you ever heard of Hemingway? Do you have any fans of Hemingway here? Like anyone who's like very amazing? Well, I'm going to rely on you for a lot of references. But Hemingway is probably, I would say, the best writer of the 20th century. Like, he's an amazing American fiction writer. And this talk, actually, what I'm going to present is how we can use more fiction to really improve our storytelling. And because this is a talk about storytelling, of course, I'm going to start with a small story, like a really, really short story. Back in 2014, I was working for YouTube. And actually, there is someone here like who was working with me when I was at YouTube. He was in our PR agency. And YouTube had a very big crisis that year. It's long past. Some of you might remember it. But YouTube was in the news because suddenly there was a lot of terrorist content in the platform. And some of that content was being monetized because the algorithms couldn't really figure out what was terrorist content. Of course, the first thing that we did, like at that time when I was working for YouTube, was to fix like the algorithm and really make sure like there is no terrorist content, no hate content on the platform. But then I think like everyone who was working for YouTube had a bit of like an identity crisis. And we were all like, we really need to start improving the story of YouTube. And I always like writing. I always like fiction. So my manager at the time, she was like, you're going to write the story of YouTube. And I learned a lot through that process because I learned that what we call story in business is not necessarily what actual people who write stories would call a story. And I'm going to share here some learnings from that journey that I think all of us, we can apply to our marketing to make our marketing way more exciting and to actually tell stories in business that resonate with people. A bit of an intro. I am Gaston Tourn. I am Chief Marketing Officer at Curio. Not sure if anyone knows Curio, but we are the app to listen to the best journalism. So we have the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Guardian, The Economist, the Financial Times. We narrate all the top news from all those different newspapers and magazines in audio. And you can have access to all of them under just one subscription. We're launching a new app that is an AI for news. It's going to be in 2 weeks. And this is the first time I'm going to share a bit about that app. So quite exciting to showcase our new AI for news as well with this audience. Let's get started again with what do we mean by story? Particularly, what do we mean by story in a business context? And I love this cartoon from Tom Fish. Daddy, instead of a story, can you read me some branded content? And I find it fascinating because a lot of the stories that we produce or we tell in business, they're not actual stories. They're branded content. Stories are so powerful that we need to remember people pay to have access to stories. Most of us, we probably have a subscription to Netflix, movie. We buy books, novels. We really, really engage with stories to the point that we would even pay for them. I wonder how many of us would pay to watch an ad. And I feel like that's the bar that we need to have as marketeers. Like, we really need to think, are we telling stories that people are so interested in that they will even pay to watch it? And I think a great example, like in the UK, is really John Lewis, right? Like, they managed to really make the whole country talk about that story. But if your marketing is not doing that, it's time to start rethinking what type of stories you're telling. Going back to my time at YouTube. So I used to work for Google. I was leading part of like the marketing for YouTube, and particularly I was leading the narratives and the storytelling for YouTube. And when that crisis happened, we're talking 2014, 15, I started to think, how can we improve the story of YouTube? And the first thing I did is starting to distill like the most important elements of YouTube story. Using a diagram. Have you ever used this kind of diagrams in business? Like, this is the worst template you can use to tell a story in business. But I started here. Like, I am guilty of this. I started by trying to put the most important elements of YouTube in a diagram. At the same time, I was doing a master's in creative writing at Oxford. And it was very interesting that whenever I was, talking about stories with writers, with screenwriters, it was a very different template that we use to craft a story. Most fiction writers, most people who actually live by writing stories, they would never use a diagram, which is what we use in business. What they would use is the story arc. And there is a big difference between using a story arc and using a diagram. Anything that you see immediately, like, that is quite different. I think like a very big difference here is that this one has time. As you can see, something starts, then something goes up, there's a climax, and then it goes down. And that change in time is what makes great stories. If there's anything that I would like everyone to take away from this session, is like, stories need change. Without change, there is no storytelling. When you go to the pub and tell your friends what happened in the day, what usually you start with is with change. What changed that day? What's different? Because that's what like grabs people's attention. Yet when it comes to business storytelling, we ignore the change and we try to go into something a bit static that it's very pristine, it's very clean, it's very beautiful, but at the same time doesn't tell a story. Stories are messy in a good sense, in the sense that actually they bring change and conflict. They bring drama. Even the word drama in itself says it, right? Like, drama is all about conflict and change. So whenever you have to craft your next advert, your next press release, your next even like landing page, try to think about the message that you want to convey to your audience and try to put it in this framework. Do not use concentric circles. Start using a story arc, because it's going to really help you to understand what are the highs and lows in your message. And today I'm going to share a lot of examples that do this really effectively and really well. This is the first thing I noticed when I started going back to fiction writers. I decided to throw away all business books on storytelling, and I'm just going to actually learn from writers on how to tell better business stories. This was the first thing I learned, but then I learned a lot of other things from Hemingway. And Hemingway has an amazing book that actually he didn't publish. It's kind of a compilation of all the advice, all the pieces of advice that Hemingway shared during his career. And someone compiled all of it in this book that is called Ernest Hemingway on Writing. It's advice for writers. And I encourage anyone who wants to improve their storytelling to buy this book. Do not buy any business books on storytelling. Buy Ernest Hemingway on Writing. It's honestly the best advice you will ever get on storytelling. And in this session, I'm going to share 3 pieces of advice that Hemingway shares in that book that really inspired me to do better marketing. And I'm going to share with you also some examples of campaigns that are inspired in his advice. So are we ready? Like, tip number 1 from Hemingway: grab people's attention from the word go. He insists that the opening line of every single story has to basically throw you into a completely different world. And if you cannot make it in that first line, you will lose your audience forever. He said this, we're talking like 60, 70 years ago. When we talk about YouTube advertising, YouTube videos nowadays, we say exactly the same, right? Like, you need to win your audience in the first 5 seconds or you lose them. And he was already sharing a very similar piece of advice for writers. he really, really mastered the opening line. Sometimes he even rewrote the opening line thousands of times for every single story that he wrote. This is one of my favorite opening sentences, opening lines of a really beautiful short story from Hemingway. The opening line says, "It was now lunchtime, and they were all sitting under the double green fly of the dining tent, pretending that nothing had happened." It's a beautiful opening line, and I feel like what is particularly really beautiful about this is that you can immediately, in that opening sentence, figure out that there is something going wrong, that there is conflict, which is like what I mentioned at the beginning, like conflict and change are critical. And especially the use of the word pretending, right? Why are they pretending? Like immediately you're like, there is something wrong here. There is something going on. This advice is not just amazing, or like this resource is not just amazing for fiction, it's also incredible for advertising. And I'm going to use a very old example. It's this advert from the 20s. So 1920s, copywriter in New York, John Caples, probably one of the best performance copywriters. Even before digital, he really figured out how to drive sales with advertising copy. We're talking the 20s. We're talking like right after a pandemic, not like the last one, like the previous one, Spanish flu. We're talking like war, like not really an environment where like a lot of businesses were driving growth. This was before the roaring 20s. It was like when still there was a crisis and like the economy was not moving. And this guy had to figure out how to sell pianos in that environment in New York. And he decided to throw away all the rules of copywriting, and he wrote this sentence in the advert, which said, "They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play." And you can see again, the same resource that Hemingway used in fiction, this copywriter is using in advertising. It's really kind of like giving you the tip of the iceberg, and then you're like, oh my God, I want to carry on reading. What happened when that person started to play? But this also applies to physical retail. I know that this is an e-commerce conference, but I know that a lot of you might also sell through e-commerce. In my previous role, I was CMO at Appear Here. Appear Here is a marketplace for shops, for stores, for physical shops, kind of like the Airbnb for physical retail. And during the pandemic, we had one amazing brand launching in London. We're talking like middle of lockdown, right? That it was actually quite crazy for someone to decide to launch a shop, a physical shop. And they decided to launch a supermarket of dreams. It went crazy. Literally, they had queues, like hundreds and hundreds of people trying to access the supermarket of dreams. It was so successful that actually they expanded to 3 supermarket of dreams. You can find them in London in different places. What worked really well here, this is the first opening line, right? I always think about the display window as like the opening line of your shop. And what they did really well is use the unexpected to grab people's attention, right? Whenever you think about supermarkets, you think it's gonna be functional, it's gonna be boring, oh my God, like, I feel like there is probably not like a more antagonistic word for dreams than supermarket. Like supermarkets do not have anything to do with dreams, unfortunately. But this guy, he was like, I'm going to create the first supermarket of dreams. And it went viral. And I feel like there is really, really something to say. We're just literally using like letters and nothing else. It's not a fancy display. We're not talking like Louis Vuitton, right? We're talking something very simple. It completely grabbed people's imagination. And I said that I'm going to reveal like a new app that we're launching at Curio. Curio, my current company, we are an app to listen to the best journalism. But we're going to be launching a new app in 2 weeks. This is the first time I'm showing this. It's actually going to be launching in 2 weeks, so it's going to be the first audience that sees this. But it's going to be an AI for news. So we're going to be launching Rio. Rio is an AI that you can talk to. You can tell this AI I'm interested in technology news, and it's going to like send you technology news from the top newspapers and magazines in the world. So from Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Guardian, all the top publications, you're going to have access to those news. When we were creating the campaign, we started actually by really, really obsessing about what kind of pain points we mention in every single, in this case it's an Instagram story. Like it's going to be the Instagram stories to start promoting it. So we started with all the pain points that people really, really have with news at the moment. Whenever you talk to people who consume news, a lot of them are abandoning news, or they really feel like news is not a healthy habit for them. And with Rio, we're trying to tackle that. And as you can see, like every single line, what we try to do is really capture people's imagination. We get lost in doom scrolling when it comes to news. We have become trapped in echo chambers. We're drowning in fake news and untrustworthy sources. So all of those are like the pain points, and I feel like that's our way of grabbing people's attention and then presenting Rio, that is going to be this new app. It's invite only, and it's going to be free for early users. So if you want to sign up, you can sign up on rionews.ai, and you're going to get free access to more than 30 newspapers and magazines, all the content for early users. So this was a really fun campaign, and I think like we really apply that principle of grabbing people's attention from the word go. That's the first one, but there are two more. And the next one is one of my favorite tips from Hemingway. Making a scene. You probably know that in fiction, scenes are like the most important resource that every writer has. But actually, if we go back to the origins of the expression making a scene, it really tells you what fiction is all about. If I say, I am making a scene here, what do you all start to think about? Like, it's like, oh my God, this guy is like, shouting, crying, right? Like there is drama, there is conflict. That's great, because that's what storytelling needs to have. And I feel like a lot of advertising really, really ignores that great storytelling needs conflict, needs negative emotions, and needs a bit of like just in general drama. We cannot tell stories of like just people running through the fields, having milk and being happy, because nobody connects emotionally with those stories. Great stories, they need conflict. I'm going to share some examples of this, but before I share some examples, there's an amazing quote from another writer who is not Hemingway. In this case, it's John Le Carre, one of the most amazing British writers. And he said, the cat sat on the mat is not a story. The cat sat on the dog's mat is a story. And anyone who worked with me probably knows that one question I always ask when I review a creative or a landing page or a press release is, who is the dog? And it's a question that I encourage everyone to ask. When you're reviewing a creative, ask who is the dog? Because if there is not a dog, that story is not going to be great. And I'm going to share some examples where you can clearly see who is the dog in those stories. This is an example from Bumble. Anyone knows Bumble? Badoo? Group of dating apps? I used to be CMO of Badoo Group at that point. Now it's called Bumble Group. It's a group of dating apps. And this was a fascinating campaign. It happened that suddenly one of the users on Bumble is a female-first dating app. One of the users on Bumble, called Connor, started making really, really male-chauvinist comments to another user on Bumble. So the customer service team, the community team at Bumble was like, we need to kick him out. And we definitely kicked him out because he was not respecting the community principles. But at that point, I was like, this is a great opportunity to make a scene. We should actually call this guy out and write an open letter to Connor. And as you can see, the open letter to Connor was a bit kind of like tongue-in-cheek. I feel like it was something like, it has been brought to our attention that you lost your cool on one of our female users, Ashley. She made small talk, you felt personally attacked. And then like really about kind of like making fun of that guy who was like just, a dick basically. So we were like really trying to make a thing out of him. We got a lot of organic growth thanks to this. We got coverage literally everywhere. Cosmopolitan, Bumble banned Sex is Fine and Bro after he sent abusive messages. Huffington Post, dating app Bumble shames male user for calling woman a gold-digging whore. So we really got a lot of attention by not shutting up, but really, really calling out this bad behavior. One more example, and this one is from Apple. And it really holds a special place on my heart because it was filmed in Buenos Aires. I'm originally from Argentina, and this is literally the street where I usually, when I was a university student. So when you watch this advert from Apple, try to think who is the dog in this advert.
With your feet on the air and your head on the ground, try to strip and spin it, yeah. Where's my mind? Where's my mind? Where is my mind? Thank you.
Enjoy.
Where is my mind?
Nice. So we can see here how Apple really creates a dog, which is noise, right? Like, it doesn't need to be a physical person or an enemy. It's noise that here creates the conflict and makes the thing. The last tip from Hemingway, telling the truth, words and all. And this is so important. All of us as marketeers, we are trying to embellish the truth. But sometimes actually just telling the truth really, really brings trust to a relationship. And I think especially as brands, we should be honest about our pitfalls. Some examples from brands that do this really well. Volkswagen, they needed to expand to the US in the 60s. They had a small car. Americans love big cars. So suddenly they were like, we're not going to win that market unless we acknowledge that we're a small car, we're an ugly car, but at the same time, we can make you feel unique. We can make you think small. This campaign increased sales for Volkswagen by 25% in the US. Another more recent example is from Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I love that they did this because Kentucky Fried Chicken, they ran out of chicken in the UK. If you run a chicken shop and you run out of chicken, the first thing you're gonna say is like, fuck, I ran out of chicken. And that's exactly what they did in this advert. And I love it because as corporates, like especially when you work in a big brand, you lose that humanity. Like sometimes you're like, I apologize for like, really lacking and the chicken shortage, but that's not the human response. If you own a chicken shop and you run out of chicken, you're gonna say that word. You're not gonna be like, we apologize profusely for like the chicken shortage. So sometimes being human really, really connects. And my last example is from Netflix. This is a campaign they ran in Spanish-speaking countries. And it's amazing. What they did is we all run different brands, and we know that Twitter is where haters really thrive. Now it's called X, but it's still a place full of haters. What Netflix did is rather than shying away from haters, they put all those tweets on billboards. And this is an example of one of the tweets. It was, the Netflix movie catalog is like my exams. A couple of things that are okay, then a lot of crap to fill. So they literally put these tweets, and then after the tweet, this came on stage. It said, like, we're working on it with love, Netflix. This is an amazing example of using honesty to really build trust and build empathy with your customers. So 3 tips from Hemingway. There are way more tips on that book, so I encourage everyone to read it. Grab people's attention from the word go. Obsess about the first 5 seconds. Obsess about the first fold on your website. Because if you cannot capture people's attention in that initial interaction, you're going to lose them forever. make a scene, bring some conflict. Do not worry about being dramatic, because that's actually what people will engage with. And then finally, tell the truth, warts and all. Be honest. I think honesty really builds empathy. Just one final example, and this one comes from my time at YouTube. So I mentioned that I was kind of like tasked to write that YouTube story. And a lot of that inspiration then came into different kind of like videos and different communications to try to reignite the purpose and the mission of YouTube as a platform. And a lot of that storytelling and a lot of those tips that I learned from Hemingway were used for this particular brand video that really tells a story about what is YouTube and why YouTube is important. And hopefully you can see here how those 3 principles that I mentioned are applied in this video.
Really good?
Look at these moments. All of these stories, secrets, revelations from every corner of the world. Every video a chance to walk in someone else's shoes. A reminder of how amazingly generous people are, how hilariously funny, and how heartbreakingly vulnerable humans can be.
Thank you guys so much for being here for me.
This is the rawest, purest, most unfiltered portrait of who we are as people. A celebration of what humans can do. Proof of our potential, a motor for our progress.
We only get one chance at life, and you're always going to be happy if you're going to be real with yourself.
This is what happens when you give everyone a voice, a chance to be heard, and a stage to be seen.
Julius Yago, they call him the YouTube man.
Whatever your thing is, well, here it can become the next big thing. That person who thought they were no one, they can become someone. That voice that thought it didn't matter, well, it can start a movement. Even when you feel all alone in the world, it's here you can find someone just like you.
Days like this is why I started, because otherwise I would just be doing this alone. This is what family's about right here.
That's the power of YouTube. That's the power of you. All of you.
Great. Well, that was everything for today. Thanks so much for coming, and yeah, wish you all the best.